The room was filled with the low hum of conversation, laughter, and clinking glasses, as the guests at the grand gala mingled in elegant attire. A billionaire CEO, dressed in a sharp black tuxedo, stood across the room, surrounded by his entourage, silently surveying the crowd. His eyes glided from one person to another, calculating, analyzing, as he always did in these high-profile events. No one noticed him looking, but he had mastered the art of observing without being observed. Suddenly, a small voice pierced through the noise of the ballroom. It came from a little boy standing beside his mother, both of them near the buffet table. The boy's face lit up with innocent curiosity, and he pointed directly at the billionaire with his small, chubby finger. "Hey Mom, this man has been looking at you all night," the boy exclaimed with surprising confidence. The words hung in the air, and for a brief moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. The CEO's face froze, his sharp features hardening as if the boy's words had cut through the polished veneer he so carefully maintained. His gaze shifted to the mother, who was now staring at her son with wide eyes, clearly unsure of how to react. She quickly tried to shush him, but it was too late. Every eye in the room had turned toward them, drawn by the boy's statement. The CEO's expression shifted from one of indifference to something more unsettling, something that resembled fear, but only for a fraction of a second before he masked it again. But that brief moment did not escape the eyes of those watching. The boy's innocent statement had unveiled something that no one could yet fully understand, but that everyone could feel. The mother's face went pale. She had no idea why her son had made such an announcement, and yet, deep down, a part of her felt an odd shiver run down her spine. There was something strangely familiar about the CEO, something that made her heart beat just a little faster. She looked back at the boy, then at the CEO, and felt a mix of confusion and unease rising inside her. For the billionaire, everything inside him seemed to freeze. It was as if the boy had opened a door to a secret that he had long kept hidden. He quickly regained control, but the damage had already been done. People were talking, whispering, wondering about the CEO's strange reaction to a child's innocent comment. And then the boy spoke again, breaking the uneasy silence. "Mom, I think he knows you," he said softly, his voice barely audible over the murmurs of the crowd. The CEO's eyes widened briefly before they narrowed again. He knew. He knew that the boy's words had uncovered something that could no longer stay hidden in the shadows. A secret. A connection. And something about that moment, something in the way the boy had so casually exposed it, was about to change everything. The guests around them were watching now, waiting for something to happen, but no one knew exactly what. What was it about this boy's comment that had sent a ripple of unease through the billionaire? What hidden truth had just been revealed? The air in the room thickened with anticipation. The CEO was no longer just the powerful figure everyone had admired, now, he was a man with something to hide. And no one in the room was going to let this moment slip away without seeking answers. The moment the little boy had spoken, a shift occurred in the room. What had once been an ordinary evening of mingling, laughter, and clinking glasses was now charged with an undeniable tension. The CEO, who had once carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had everything under control, was now the center of attention. His gaze shifted uncomfortably as whispers floated through the crowd, but his mind raced, already calculating his next move. He couldn't let this slip, he couldn't let anyone know the truth. To understand why this simple comment had shaken him to his core, one had to look back. The CEO wasn't always the imposing figure he appeared to be. In fact, his rise to power was a story steeped in secrecy, ambition, and a dark past that few knew about. The path that had led him to wealth and influence had not been paved with honesty or kindness, but with manipulation and carefully hidden truths. Years ago, before the world knew his name, he was just another struggling entrepreneur, hungry for success, desperate for any opportunity to climb the corporate ladder. He started his career in a small office, taking any job he could get. And it was during this time that he met her, the woman who would change his life forever. She was smart, driven, and beautiful, someone who had the power to lift him up from his own obscurity. They worked together on a project that had the potential to revolutionize their industry. But as their professional relationship deepened, so did their personal one. They grew close, closer than anyone realized. What started as shared ambition blossomed into an affair, one that no one at the time would have suspected, least of all the woman's family. But secrets like that are never meant to stay buried. One day, the woman vanished without a trace. Her disappearance shocked everyone, but no one could find any trace of where she had gone or what had happened to her. Some speculated that she had left for personal reasons, others whispered about foul play, but the truth remained hidden, until now. The CEO had always told himself he'd buried that part of his past, that the woman and their brief affair were just footnotes in the book of his rise to power. But when the little boy pointed at him across the room, it all came rushing back, the memories he had tried so hard to suppress, the woman's face, her touch, her disappearance. The boy's words weren't just a random observation, they were a reminder of a life he thought was long behind him. He had no idea how the boy knew, or why he had spoken up, but the fear that had flashed in his eyes just moments ago wasn't for show, it was real. What the CEO didn't realize, however, was that the boy's mother wasn't just any woman. She had been the missing woman's closest friend, and she knew far more about the CEO's past than he was comfortable with. She had never truly believed the official story of her friend's disappearance, and over the years, she had uncovered bits and pieces of information that painted a very different picture. It was no coincidence that she had crossed paths with the billionaire again. Their worlds had collided once more, and this time, there would be no hiding from the past. The CEO had spent years building his empire on the lie that his past had been erased, but the boy's innocent comment had just cracked open the door to everything he had tried to bury. The night was young, and the story was just beginning to unfold. What the CEO didn't know yet was that his past was coming back with a vengeance, and this time, there was no running from it. The little boy had unknowingly triggered a chain of events that would unravel the billionaire's carefully constructed life. The question now was how far the truth would reach, and what the consequences would be for everyone involved. And as the whispers grew louder and more people turned their attention to the CEO, he knew that the time for hiding was running out. The truth was no longer a secret, it was only a matter of time before it would come to light. The room felt colder now. The soft murmurs that had surrounded the little boy's statement had grown into louder whispers. All eyes were on the billionaire CEO. For the first time in years, the powerful man who had built a financial empire felt cornered. His usual calm demeanor was slipping, his sharp gaze flickering between the boy, his mother, and the surrounding crowd. His jaw tightened, and his fingers subtly gripped the glass of champagne he held, as though the smooth surface could anchor him to this moment. The boy's words kept echoing in his mind, "This man has been looking at you all night." He had hoped no one would notice, that his past, the one he had buried, would remain hidden beneath layers of wealth and success. But now, it was out there. The small, innocent comment had shattered the wall he had so carefully constructed around his darkest secrets. He hadn't expected anyone to remember, let alone a child who hadn't even been alive when it all happened. But somehow, this boy knew something. Something that shouldn't have been possible. The CEO straightened himself up, attempting to regain his usual authoritative posture, but his eyes betrayed him. He looked across the room, his gaze sweeping over the faces of the guests, but there was a noticeable shift. The once unassuming crowd, now fully aware of the tension, seemed to lean in, waiting for the next move. What did the little boy mean? Why had he pointed at the billionaire with such certainty? His heart began to race. The boy's mother seemed oblivious, at least on the surface, but there was something in the way she stood, her posture tense, that told the billionaire she might know more than she was letting on. He scanned her face for any hint of recognition, but all he could find was an unreadable expression. Yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that she had something to say, something to reveal, but was holding back for some reason. "I'm sure it's nothing," the CEO said, forcing a smile as he tried to recover. But his voice cracked slightly, betraying his unease. The mother, her gaze still fixed on her son, finally turned her eyes toward him. "What did you mean by that?" she asked, her voice steady, but the undercurrent of suspicion was unmistakable. Her words carried weight, as if she had been waiting for this moment to arrive. She had no idea how the boy knew, but she had a strong feeling that this encounter was not by chance. This man, the man who had been looking at her so intently, was hiding something. She could sense it. The billionaire's mind raced. Should he deny it? Should he brush it off as an innocent mistake? He had spent years perfecting his image, ensuring that no one could ever trace his past back to him. Yet here, in the midst of this extravagant gala, the past was clawing its way to the surface, and there was nowhere to run. His thoughts were interrupted by the boy's soft voice again. "Mom, I think he knows you," the boy repeated, more confidently this time. It was as if the boy had been speaking directly to the CEO's soul, unearthing a part of his past that had been hidden away for far too long. A sudden wave of nausea swept over the billionaire. The boy's words, so simple, so innocent, had just cracked open the door to something he wasn't ready to face. He had been so careful. He had built his fortune on deception, on keeping his past buried deep. But this boy, this small, unassuming child, had just exposed the truth in the most casual way possible. He couldn't let this continue. As the CEO stood there, trying to regain control of the situation, he felt an overwhelming sense of dread. What did this boy know? How could he have known? The questions raced through his mind, but there was no answer. Just a gnawing feeling that everything was about to unravel. Around them, the whispers grew louder. The guests were growing impatient, sensing that something was wrong, but unsure of what it was. The CEO couldn't allow himself to falter in front of them. He cleared his throat, attempting to regain his composure. "This is ridiculous," he said with a forced chuckle, trying to wave off the tension. "Just a simple misunderstanding. A child's innocent imagination, I'm sure." But deep down, he knew he was lying. This wasn't some innocent mistake. The boy had exposed something he wasn't ready to confront. And now, there was no turning back. As the CEO slowly backed away from the crowd, his mind spun. He had to think fast. This wasn't just about his reputation anymore. It was about a past he had thought was safely buried. And now it seemed that the past had found its way back to haunt him, in the most unexpected way imaginable. The question was, who else knew, and what were they going to do about it? The night had only just begun, and the billionaire's carefully constructed world was already starting to crack. The truth, it seemed, was no longer something he could control. The billionaire CEO tried to regain his composure, but the damage had already been done. The boy's words, though innocent in their delivery, had hit like a bolt of lightning, striking deep into the core of a past he desperately wanted to forget. He could feel the walls closing in as he made his way through the crowded ballroom, trying to distance himself from the eyes that followed his every movement. He knew that the inevitable was approaching, his carefully constructed image was about to crumble. As he made his way to the far side of the room, he found himself thinking of her. Her. The woman from his past, the one he had tried so hard to erase from his memory. Her name still haunted him in the quiet moments of the night. But now, the boy's words had resurrected her, and with her, the truth. The mother, she wasn't just anyone. The CEO had recognized her the moment his eyes fell upon her earlier that night. She had changed, of course. Time had a way of doing that, but he knew who she was. She had once been a close friend of the woman who had vanished so many years ago. The same woman who had shared a secret with him, a secret that he could never let the world know. The billionaire's heart began to pound in his chest as the memories flooded back, memories of late nights working together, of whispers shared in the dark corners of their office, and of a bond that had been broken too soon. The woman had disappeared without a trace, leaving him with nothing but guilt and fear. But now, the boy had unknowingly opened a door that had been sealed shut for years. The mother standing across the room wasn't just an innocent bystander, she had been part of it all. The CEO's hands trembled slightly as he reached for his glass, his mind racing. He had been careful, so careful, over the years. The missing woman's disappearance had been swept under the rug, the story buried in whispers and lies. But as the years went by, the pain of it never truly left him. It was always there, lurking beneath the surface. And now, here she was, the woman's closest friend, standing only a few feet away from him, watching, waiting for him to crack. She knew. She had always known more than she let on. The boy's comment had simply unlocked the door. And that was just the beginning. The mother had long suspected that something had happened to her friend, something much darker than anyone cared to admit. Over the years, she had quietly pieced together bits of information, following a trail of whispers, rumors, and unspoken truths. She had never fully believed the official story. In her heart, she knew that the CEO's hands were stained with something more than just business deals. And now, the moment of reckoning had arrived. The boy's words were not just a random remark, they were a clue. A key that would open the door to a truth neither she nor the CEO were prepared to confront. As the CEO stood across the room, his mind spinning, he could see the mother's gaze locked on him. She was no longer just a concerned woman caught up in the moment, she was someone who had spent years quietly watching, learning, waiting. She had been the one to notice the signs, to see the gaps in the story. And now, she was here, in front of him, with her son who had unknowingly triggered everything. The billionaire's grip tightened around his glass, his fingers numb. He couldn't run. There was nowhere to hide anymore. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his racing heart. The truth was coming, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The boy had unknowingly uncovered a thread, and now it was unraveling. The connection between the CEO and the missing woman was no longer a secret, it was out in the open. The pieces were falling into place, and the billionaire knew it was only a matter of time before the full picture was revealed. The room felt smaller now, suffocating even. He had to act fast, before the situation spiraled completely out of control. But as he looked at the mother, her eyes unwavering, he knew that time was not on his side. The CEO's past had finally caught up with him, and the truth was about to come crashing down. The tension in the room was suffocating. The billionaire CEO could feel it closing in on him, a weight he hadn't experienced in years. He had always been in control of his life, his empire, his reputation, his carefully guarded secrets. But now, all of that was unraveling in the most public way imaginable. The little boy's innocent observation had triggered something that no amount of wealth or influence could conceal. The room was still buzzing with whispers, but the CEO could hardly focus on any of them. His gaze was locked on the mother, who was now moving toward him with purpose. There was no hiding from her anymore. She knew, she had known all along. Her sharp, calculating eyes betrayed nothing, but there was an unspoken understanding between them. She had spent years piecing together the mystery of her friend's disappearance, and now, it seemed, all those years of quiet suspicion were about to bear fruit. The billionaire shifted uncomfortably, his mind racing. What could he say? What excuse could he offer for the things he had done? He couldn't escape the truth. The lies he had built his life on were about to come crashing down, and he knew there was no turning back. The mother reached him, standing just a few feet away. Her presence was commanding, her posture stiff with years of restrained emotion. The crowd around them had quieted, sensing the impending confrontation, but no one dared to speak. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The air between them was thick with unspoken words, years of pain, guilt, and unresolved questions hanging like a dark cloud. Finally, it was the mother who broke the silence. You thought you could bury it, didn't you? She asked softly, but the edge in her voice was unmistakable. The CEO's heart skipped a beat, but he didn't answer right away. Instead, he took a deep breath and let the silence stretch between them. What could he say? How could he explain the unexplainable? I didn't want it to be like this, he said finally, his voice low and tense. I didn't want anyone to know. I thought I could move on. Move on, she repeated, her voice trembling slightly with restrained anger. You can't just move on from what you did. You can't just erase a person's life because it's convenient for you. Her words stung more than he expected, cutting through the layers of denial and self-justification that had built up over the years. He had told himself that he was a different man now, that the past was a ghost that no longer haunted him. But the truth was that he had never really escaped it. And now, standing in front of the woman who had been her closest friend, he realized that he never would. The crowd had grown even quieter now, all eyes trained on them as the tension between the two grew thicker. The boy stood beside his mother, his eyes wide with confusion and curiosity. He didn't understand the gravity of the situation, but his presence felt like a catalyst. The little boy had unknowingly triggered something much larger than anyone could have anticipated. You never thought anyone would find out, did you? The mother continued, her voice barely above a whisper. You thought you could hide it, bury it under your wealth, your success. But the truth doesn't stay hidden forever. The CEO swallowed hard. His past, the woman who had vanished from his life, the affair, the secrets, it all came rushing back to him in that moment. He had never wanted to face it again. He had buried it so deep, locked it away in the dark corners of his mind. But now, it was all here, laid bare for the world to see. And the little boy, with his innocent words, had brought it all back to life. I never meant for it to end like this, the CEO murmured, the words tasting bitter on his tongue. He had spent years telling himself that he had done the right thing, that he had moved on, that the past was a mistake that didn't matter anymore. But now, in the face of the woman's unwavering gaze, he realized how hollow those justifications had been. The mother's eyes softened, but only slightly. You think you're the only one who had to live with the consequences? She asked. I lost my best friend. And you, she paused, her voice catching in her throat. You destroyed everything. You thought you could walk away without paying the price. The crowd around them was silent now, hanging on every word, every exchange. It was as though time had slowed, and the only thing that mattered was this moment, this revelation. The CEO's mind reeled. The mother had uncovered the truth. She had always suspected, always known that something was wrong, but now she had the pieces, the final part of the puzzle. The truth that had been buried for so long was no longer just a distant memory, it was right in front of him, threatening to bring everything crashing down. He looked at the boy again, the innocent child who had unknowingly set all of this in motion. It wasn't just the mother who knew the truth, it was the child, too. And he had no idea what that meant for the CEO. How long would it take before everyone in this room knew what he had done? How long before his entire empire crumbled beneath the weight of his past? The billionaire knew one thing for certain now, the truth was out, and there was no escaping it. The room seemed to close in around the billionaire, every corner filled with the weight of unspoken truths. His thoughts were a jumbled mess as the mother's words echoed in his mind. You thought you could move on. You thought you could bury it. The past he had tried so hard to erase, to push down into the deepest parts of his mind, had come rushing back, like a flood breaking through a dam. He couldn't escape it now. The people in the room, the whispers, the quiet stares, everything was a reflection of the truth that had been laid bare. For the first time, the billionaire felt vulnerable. He had been powerful, untouchable, the man who could buy his way out of anything. But this was different. This was his past, his guilt, his lies, and no amount of money could make it go away. The mother stood in front of him, her eyes cold and unyielding. The boy, standing quietly by her side, seemed oblivious to the full gravity of the situation. But the billionaire knew. He knew the child had unknowingly unearthed something far deeper than he could comprehend. And now, there was nowhere to hide. "I never wanted it to end like this," the billionaire repeated, his voice cracking as the weight of his own words settled in. He had spent so many years convincing himself that the affair, the disappearance of the woman, the lies, none of it mattered anymore. He had rebuilt his life from the ground up, forged a fortune from nothing. But it had all been built on a lie. A lie he could no longer keep buried. The mother's expression softened, but only for a moment. She had spent years mourning the loss of her friend, trying to piece together the fragments of a story that had never quite made sense. She had suspected that the CEO was involved, that he held the answers. But now, hearing the billionaire speak, she could see the weight of the guilt in his eyes. It wasn't just about the lies. It was about the years of living with the consequences of those lies. "Do you even know what you've done?" she asked quietly, her voice steady but filled with an undercurrent of raw emotion. "Do you understand the pain you've caused?" The billionaire swallowed hard. He had never truly allowed himself to think about the consequences of his actions. His success, his wealth, his position, those things had always been his focus. But now, for the first time, he was forced to confront the truth of the woman's disappearance and the lives that had been shattered because of it. The life he had built had come at the cost of someone else's. He looked at the boy again, his heart sinking as the weight of his past settled on his shoulders. The boy didn't know what was happening. He didn't understand the gravity of his words. But the truth was there, in the air between them, and it was undeniable. This child had unknowingly opened the floodgates, and now the billionaire's entire world was at risk of crashing down. The CEO closed his eyes for a moment, trying to steady his racing heart. He had built his empire on the idea that no one could touch him, that his secrets were safe. But now, with the mother standing in front of him, her unwavering gaze fixed on him, he realized how fragile his world truly was. The mother's voice broke through his thoughts. "You think your wealth and power will save you? You think you can just pay your way out of this?" she asked, her words sharp as a knife. "You can't. You can't erase what you've done. You can't undo the harm you've caused." The billionaire's chest tightened. For the first time in years, he felt small. His wealth, his power, his influence, they meant nothing now. The truth was more powerful than any fortune he had built. And the more he thought about it, the more he realized that the past wasn't something that could be erased or buried. It was something that had to be faced. The crowd around them had grown silent, sensing the shifting atmosphere, but no one dared to interrupt. The tension between the CEO and the mother was palpable. The air felt thick with the weight of everything that had been left unsaid for so long. "I'm sorry," the CEO said quietly, the words barely escaping his lips. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was all he could offer in this moment. The apology felt hollow, like a weak attempt to atone for something much larger than he could ever fix. The mother's eyes softened, but only a little. "Sorry doesn't change anything," she replied. "It doesn't bring her back. It doesn't erase the damage you've done." The words stung, but they were the truth. The CEO had spent years trying to move forward, to escape the past. But in this moment, he realized that the past wasn't something that could be outrun. It had a way of finding you, of catching up with you, no matter how far you tried to distance yourself. The little boy's innocent words had triggered something in him that he had never been prepared to face. The truth had come flooding back, and now there was no turning back. As the mother stood in front of him, her gaze unwavering, the billionaire knew one thing for certain: this was the moment that would change everything. He could no longer hide. He could no longer pretend. The truth was out. And now, he had to face the consequences. The room was still, the silence now all-encompassing. The billionaire stood there, his shoulders slumped, his mind swirling with the realization that he could no longer escape his past. The woman he had wronged, the secrets he had buried, the lies he had told, everything was out in the open. And there was no running from it now. The mother, standing before him, had made her point clear. But there was something else in her gaze, something softer, something more compassionate. As much as she had every right to be angry, to lash out, she stood with a quiet strength, as though she had already accepted that some things couldn't be changed, that some wounds could never fully heal. "Do you know what the hardest part is?" she asked, her voice steady but tinged with sorrow. "It's not that people make mistakes. It's that some mistakes can't be undone. No amount of wealth or success can fix them. You can't buy your way out of your past." The billionaire nodded slowly, the weight of her words sinking in. He had spent so many years chasing after success, thinking that it would make up for everything else. He had thought that if he built enough, if he gained enough power, he could leave behind the things that haunted him. But now, standing before the mother, he realized how wrong he had been. "It's not about fixing the past," he whispered, as if speaking to himself. "It's about learning from it. Owning it. Taking responsibility." For a moment, there was a shift in the air, a subtle change, almost imperceptible. It was as though the universe had paused, just for a second, to let the words settle. The mother didn't speak right away. She simply watched him, her expression softening. The anger had faded, replaced by something else, something that resembled understanding, perhaps even forgiveness. "I lost my friend," she said quietly. "I lost a piece of myself when she disappeared. And I've spent years wondering how things could have been different. But I can't change that. Neither can you. What matters now is what we do with the time we have left." The billionaire looked at her, a pang of guilt stabbing at his chest. She had suffered for years, not knowing the truth. She had been left in the dark, carrying the burden of her friend's disappearance, while he had been able to hide behind his wealth and success. But the truth had a way of coming to light, and now he could see the toll it had taken on her. "What do you want from me?" he asked, his voice barely audible. It was a question that had been hanging in the air since the moment he had realized what the boy's words had unleashed. She shook her head. "I don't want anything from you. Not anymore. What I wanted was closure. The truth. And now that I have it, I can move forward. I just hope you can, too." The billionaire stood there, absorbing her words. For the first time in years, he felt something resembling peace. It wasn't the kind of peace that came with solving a problem or fixing a mistake. It was the kind of peace that came with acceptance. He couldn't change the past, but he could change how he moved forward from this point on. He could own his mistakes. He could be better. And that was the life lesson. No amount of money, power, or success could ever truly replace the importance of owning your actions, of facing the consequences of the choices you've made. The billionaire had spent so many years running from his mistakes, thinking that he could outrun the past. But the truth had found him, and in that moment, he understood that it was not the mistakes that defined him, but how he chose to learn from them, how he chose to live in the aftermath. As the mother turned to leave, her steps quiet but firm, the billionaire's gaze lingered on her for a moment longer. He had lost a lot, perhaps more than he could ever get back. But standing here, in the quiet aftermath of a revelation, he realized that he had also gained something important, the understanding that his past didn't have to define his future. The boy, who had unknowingly set this chain of events in motion, stood beside his mother, still unaware of the full weight of what had just happened. But the billionaire had learned something valuable from him, something he would carry with him for the rest of his life. And as the night wore on, the billionaire knew that the hardest part was over. The truth had come to light. And now, for the first time in years, he could finally begin the process of rebuilding, not just his reputation, but his own sense of who he was, and who he wanted to become. The journey wouldn't be easy, but it would be real. And that, he realized, was all that truly mattered.